Today is February 26th, 2018. My name is Joe Todd. This is an interview with Richard Cain in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
September. Where was I born?
Where?
In Erie, Kansas, on a farm.
Dewey?
Erie,
Erie.
Kansas. E-R-I-E.
And when's your birthday?
9/26/44. 26.
26, I'm sorry. 24. 24. 44. I can't write today. Who was your father?
Hubert Byrne Cain.
And your mother?
Betty Lou Cain.
What was her maiden name?
McClenning. She came from an Irish family.
M-C-C.
M-C-C-L-E-N-N-I-N-G.
Okay. Did you go through school at Erie?
No, we left Erie when I was 3 years old and moved to Independence, Kansas.
Okay. What year did you graduate from high school?
1962.
1962. Independence?
Yes.
Okay. What kind of work did your father do?
I think you got 67 there.
62. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What kind of work did your father do?
Dad had struggled from his time in the service, so he had several different jobs throughout his life. He worked at the cement plant in Independence for several years when I was a youngster, and he worked there probably 10 years. And then he worked on construction, highway construction. Then he worked several years at the paint plant in Coffeyville, Kansas, Sherwin-Williams.
Okay.
He worked there for several years. He was close to 100% disability from his wartime service, from his wounds.
You said he was a POW?
Yes, he was a POW for 9 months at the end of the war.
Okay.
He was liberated by the Russians. They came in. He was 6 foot tall and weighed a little over 100 pounds when he was liberated. I asked him one time, I said, "Dad, what do you eat?" He said, "We got potato peeling soup once a day." And he said it wasn't too bad, but we didn't get enough of it. But the Germans couldn't hardly feed themselves toward the end of the war, let alone feed their prisoners.
Yeah. Well, did you play sports in high school?
Did I play sports? Yes, I did. In fact, sports probably rescued me from getting into trouble. My junior year in high school, I had never played any kind of sports or extracurricular activities. And the high school football coach was my history teacher. And football practice had been going on for a couple of weeks. Hadn't had a game yet. And the coach, the history teacher, followed me out of class one day and he said, "I want you out for football." And he talked me into it. I thought, well, I'll try it. So I showed up for practice, and I was a pretty tough kid, pretty strong. I had helped my grandparents on the farm. I had milked cows. I had more strength than what I realized I had a lot of forearm strength. And so I did well in football. In fact, I got my senior year, and I'd only played football 2 years. My senior year, I was selected as the most valuable lineman for my senior year. I got letters from probably a half a dozen different colleges to come and play football. I ended up playing football at Independence Junior College on a scholarship, but I was just too small. I weighed, they had me on the roster at 185, but I actually weighed 175. So I was just actually too small, and I was a lineman in high school. And that was way too small for college ball, even junior college ball. So I got to play some, but not very much. I went to school for 1 semester, and then I went into the workforce, and about a year later I joined the Navy.
Okay. Where was your grandparents' farm?
I don't really remember. Now on my mother's side, I remember their farms
Okay.
more than I do on my dad's side. Because my dad's side, they moved a couple of times. It
Okay.
was on the edge of Coffeyville, over close to Edna, Kansas, I think, between Edna and Coffeyville.
Is that the farm that you worked on?
No, I worked on my mother's parents' grandfather.
Okay.
I used to spend the summers with them on
Okay.
the farm,
Okay.
and a lot of weekends. I helped my granddad a lot. I started helping to milk when I was about 11 or 12, and my granddad milked probably 8 to 10 head, depending on how many were fresh at one time. And at that time, they didn't sell milk, but he sold cream and eggs and stuff like that, and they fed milk to everything on the farm, including me. And then Swift Dairy came out one day and wanted to know if he would be interested in selling his milk as a grade C milk, because he didn't have a grade A barn. So my granddad started selling milk and started putting it in 10-gallon cans. The truck would come out and pick it up.
Okay. Besides sports, what did you do for recreation in high school?
Sports was about it. I worked some. Like I said, I worked on the farm. My family was not well off, and so I had to work. Dad left home when I was 9 years old, and Mom had the responsibility of raising 5 kids. Now, my mom and dad never divorced. They were married to the day they both died.
Yeah.
And I remember one time they were married in August, on August the 5th, and my mom reminded me, and it was just a few days after that, she said, your dad and I was married 50 years, August the 5th, and it just hit me, even though they were separated, that they had been married 50 years and none of us kids realized it and didn't do anything, because they were friends at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, they stayed friends from the later years and went on trips together, took the grandkids. They just couldn't live together.
Yeah.
But my dad was tormented by his
Oh, yeah.
military service.
What did you do after high school?
After high school, I worked. I had a job in town working at a service station, and then started junior college and played football. Went one semester. Didn't go back, and then I went to work for the Starcraft Boat Company, building fiberglass boats. Before that, I had several short jobs. I picked up a lot of experience in different jobs, oil fields. I even pressed pants in a pants factory for about 2 weeks. There was about 300 women worked there and about 12 men, and those women pestered me to death, and I finally quit after 2 weeks.
Well, which pants factory?
The Lee Manufacturing over in Cherryville, Kansas.
Okay.
But and then I went to work for the Starcraft boat plant and built fiberglass boats, which was it paid pretty well, but it was a dirty job. And I worked there until I joined the service in March of 1964.
March 1964. You joined the Navy.
Yeah.
Why
I
did
was-
you? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was getting ready to get drafted. My number was pretty good. My uncle, I had an uncle that I admired a lot, and he was retired out of the Navy, and he talked me into joining the Navy. In fact, he was friends with the recruiter there in Independence,
Okay.
and we were together up at the VFW in Independence one night, and I was 19 years old at the time, and they both of them talked me into joining the Navy.
Okay. Where'd you go for your boot camp?
Great Lakes, Illinois.
Great Lakes. Tell me about boot camp.
Boot camp it wasn't hard for me. Navy boot camp is different than Army Marine Corps boot camp. We spent a lot of time in class. we did spend some time on the drill field. They didn't call it a drill field, they called it a grinder. And did a lot of 16 count manuals with our rifles.
What's a 16 count manual?
You start out with your rifle down by your leg, and then you pull it up to your right shoulder. You move it 16 times before you get it back where it
Okay.
started.
Okay.
In fact, I remember one night in boot camp, we had, every night at 10 o'clock we had taps, and we had a recruit that was designated as the religious petty officer. And every night at 10 o'clock they played taps, and then this religious petty officer was supposed to say a prayer. And the lights went out at 10 o'clock, taps was played, he started praying, and somebody laughed out loud. And all of a sudden the lights come on, and there stood the company commander in the doorway. He was standing there listening, and he yelled, "Hit the deck, grab your rifles," or pieces they called them, "grab your pieces." And we went out to the grinder, and I think we were out there till probably 2 o'clock in the morning doing a 16 count manual. Nobody ever laughed during prayer after that.
What rifle did you train with?
The M1.
M1. Okay.
Yeah, without a firing pin.
Without a firing pin.
Yeah, when we only went to the range one day, and we shot 22 rifles.
Now, what type of training did you have in boot camp?
We had, military training, uniform training, how to wash your clothes. Of course, they give you all kinds of rules and restrictions, and you got to do it just the way they want it. You had to, when you washed your clothes, you had to tie them on the clothesline with a square knot, and the end pieces of the string had to be the same length on each side. And there was just a lot of silly requirements, but it was all part of discipline.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we did military history, and of course this was back in the 60s. And we did some knot tying and shipboard maintenance, and we didn't really get into anything that I later did when I was in the Navy.
Mm-hmm. Boot camp lasted how long?
Boot camp lasted 11 weeks.
11 weeks. From boot camp, where'd you go?
From boot camp, I went home for a couple of weeks, and then I came back to Great Lakes to go to A school. When I joined the Navy, I joined under the nuclear power program, so I was obligated for 6 years. And so in boot camp, the nuclear power, there was about 6 of us out of that company that were nuclear power, and we got a few more privileges than we were usually put in charge of something. I was a squad leader.
Okay.
But I wanted to be an electrician's mate on a submarine, and they changed my mind and made me go to machinist mate school. So after boot camp, I came back to Great Lakes to go to machinist mate A school.
Now, what is A school?
It's just a classification they have for their schools. Okay. Why it's called A school, I'm not sure. But it was a machinist mate A school.
Now, we still got a machinist mate on a nuclear submarine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, machinist mates are not really machinists as far as running machine tools. They run the pumps and things that move the liquids and the steam and the turbines and everything through the main propulsion system.
Okay. How did your A school compare to boot camp?
A school was different. We lived in a dorm. There was it was probably about like going to college. We lived, but our dorms, I think there were 6 men to each room. and every weekend we went on Liberty, and we were up the Great Lakes, so we were between Milwaukee and Chicago. And I had a friend in the dorm room I was in, and he knew a couple of girls in Chicago that had moved up there from his hometown of Ohio, and so I went with him into Chicago, and he introduced me, and from all the time I was in A school, I always had a date every weekend. But A school was pretty good, and I did pretty well in it. Graduated from A school and left there and went to Vallejo, California.
When did you graduate?
Graduated in September of 1964.
1964.
Pretty sure it was September, yeah. But left there and went home for a few days, and then took a bus to California. The bus broke down in the mountains out west of Denver, Colorado, and they had to send another bus out to pick us up. But
Now, was it a civilian bus or was it?
no, it was like a Greyhound bus.
Greyhound. Okay.
Yeah. And got to Vallejo, got enrolled in nuclear power school, and it was even a better school than the machinist made A school. But it was not the school for me. Most of the people going to that school already had a college degree, and I was just a high school graduate. And the dorms were just 2 men to a room, and the man that I roomed with, he was a college graduate and fairly intelligent. But I struggled in nuclear power school. A lot of math, a lot of high math. I mean, things I had never heard of before. And I ended up on a mandatory study group because I was struggling so much. I had to study every night from 6 o'clock to 11 o'clock with a group. There were several of us. This was early in the nuclear power school, and they didn't. Later on, and I think it took them a couple of years, they started a nuclear power prep school. And the prep school weeded you out before you got to nuclear power school. But the nuclear power school I went to, you went right into nuclear physics, reactor theory, and it was just completely over my head. In fact, the captain of the school, and he was a full captain, he called me up. I had been in school probably, and it was a 6-month school, and I had been there about 3 months. And he called me up to his office, and he said, "Richard, how'd you get in this school?" And this is the truth. They selected me for that school because of a multiple choice test that I took. And when you take a multiple choice test, you have a 50-50 chance of getting a good grade. And I got a good grade on that multiple choice test, so they said, "Well, you need to go to nuclear power school."
Was this test in boot camp?
No, this test was just before I enlisted.
Okay.
And because they select you before you go to boot camp. When you go to boot camp, you're designated a nuclear power recruit. But he said, "We're going to ship you out." He says, "You're not the only one. We got a couple hundred more that are going with you." Because there was a lot of us that got shipped out. And so I ended up in transit at Treasure Island, right outside of San Francisco, and I was there for about 2 weeks, and that was pretty interesting, 2 weeks at Treasure Island. And then I got orders to report to the USS Providence.
USS Providence. What kind of ship was the Providence?
Providence was a guided missile cruiser, designated CLG-6. And I got orders to go to that, and it was just getting ready to go into dry dock. So when I went on it, we immediately went into dry dock at 100 Point in San Francisco.
Okay.
And then since they was doing some extensive overhauls to the ship, they moved everybody off the ship onto the base in barracks. And I think we were on the base there for 4 or 5 months, something like that. And that was a pretty fun duty. The base was pretty close to Candlestick Park, and while I was there, I got to go see the Giants play baseball, got to see Willie Mays play baseball. Used to go to these San Francisco Warriors basketball games. They didn't call them Golden State then, they just called them the San Francisco Warriors. But it was interesting duty. And
So what were you doing during this time?
I worked in the galley, and I had several jobs while I was there. They would move you around. I worked in the galley for a while, and discovered that I liked to cook. And they actually put me in the salad area where you made the salads. And I had never ate much salad growing up, but I learned to make good salads. And then I worked in a movie theater as an usher for a while on base. And one job I had that I remember when I worked in the galley, they set me and another guy down on a couple of chairs and put a big stainless steel pot in front of us, and then they brought in a pallet loaded with eggs. I forget, there was 100 and some dozen eggs, like a gross dozen, 144 dozen eggs, and we had to sit there and crack those eggs into that pot for scrambled eggs, because that galley fed over 5,000 people. And I learned to crack 4 eggs at one time without getting the shell in the pot. I could open them up, 2 in each hand, and I can still do it to this day.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting.
So when the Providence came out of dry dock, did you go aboard?
Did I what?
Did you go aboard the Providence when it
Yes,
came out of dry dock?
when it came out of dry dock, we left San Francisco, and the first place we stopped was Long Beach, California, at the ammo dump, and we took on ammunition. Providence had 6-inch and 4-inch guns, and a couple of 3-inch, and we in fact, we took on ammunition all night.
What division were you in?
I was in M Division, which was the division where all the machinist mates, there was 2 divisions where the machinist mates went. One was A Division and one was M Division. M Division had the forward and after engine rooms. Okay. A Division had the air conditioning, the walk-in coolers, all of that. But I was assigned to the after engine room.
What was your job in the engine room?
Well, before I went to the engine room, anybody that comes on board ship below an E4 had to go spend 3 months in the galley. So I went to the galley, and they immediately assigned me to the spud locker, which was where you peel potatoes. But we didn't have to peel them by hand. We had an automatic peeler. We just dump them in the top, and they come out the bottom. And if you leave them in there too long, nothing comes out. But we also made the salads in there, and I got an interesting story about potato salad. The chief cook came in there to the spud locker, and he said, "Do you know how to make potato salad?" And we fed 1,200 people on that ship. Now, when I worked on the galley on the base, we also fed everybody on the base. But he asked me if I knew how to make potato salad, and I said, yeah. And the only potato salad I ever had growing up was mashed potato salad. My mother used to make the best mashed potato salad. And so I put a 50-pound bag of potatoes in a potato peeler, peeled them, put them in this big steam cooker, cooked them. We had these giant mixers, and I beat them all up, and I had them setting in. I had this big steel pot sitting on the floor in the spud locker, and I was adding mayonnaise and sweet relish and eggs and stuff to it. And the chief cook, and I was pretty far along, and I always added a little bit of sugar to my potato salad because I used to cook a little bit at home. And the chief cook come in there, and he seen that, and he says, "What the hell is that?" I said, "It's potato salad." He said, mashed potato salad? I've never heard of it. Dump it. He said, well, I am not putting that on my line. These cooks were very proud of the serving lines they set up. And he was not going to have mashed potato salad on his line. And I thought it tasted great. So I had to dump it overboard. Everything back then they dumped overboard. They don't let you do that anymore, I'm sure. They protect the ocean a little bit better. Every evening we had to dump the trash overboard. That was when we were out to sea. We didn't do that in port.
Yeah. What were your quarters on the ship?
They were, they moved them once while I was on there. When I first went on there, it was in the lower part of the ship toward the center, and then they moved them to the very back. We were the last living quarters underneath the fantail on the back of the ship, which was the roughest part of the ship when the ship was underway. Because those long shafts that had those propellers on the end of the screws, we called them, were huge. And they stretched for a long ways, and they were mounted in huge bearings that were suspended on springs. And when we were underway, as long as we were doing under 20 knots or under 14 knots, which was our usual cruising speed, when we got up toward 20, everything started vibrating. And when we would get up to 27 knots, it was like being on a rough road. I mean, just a constant washboard road. It was rougher to cob.
Did the shaft go through your quarters?
No, they went underneath our quarters.
Okay.
And out through the side of the ship.
Okay.
One of the jobs I had as a machinist mate one time was we had to, and we were in port when we did this, we had to, those big shafts where they went through the hull of the ship, on the inside they had a packing gland, and behind that packing gland was huge rings of packing that was put in there and squeezed in there to keep the seawater from coming in. And we had a pretty good leak around one of the shafts, and so we had to replace that packing. So they sent divers down on the outside of the ship to try to seal that shaft off on the outside, and I'm not sure what they used. And then they selected me, and at that time I was an E4 petty officer. They selected me and a chief petty officer, which was I think he was an E8. They closed us off in that room where this packing was. It was called the shaft alleys. And they closed the door and they pressurized that room. And you could feel the pressure on your ears. And we had to take that packing gland off of there. And I did most of the work. The E8 chief petty officer was just there to watch me. And I had to put dry packing in around that shaft. And we finally got a few rings of packing in there and put the packing gland back on it, tightened it up and squeezed it up. And after we did that, then after we got underway, they set somebody there beside it to check it to make sure it wasn't going to leak and make sure it didn't get too hot, because if it started getting too hot, you had to loosen it up a little bit. And a minute amount of water coming through wasn't a problem. In fact, that helped lubricate it.
What kind of packing material did you put around it?
I don't remember. It was huge. It was probably an inch square. It came in a big long roll. But
how big is that shaft, the diameter of the shaft?
that shaft was probably, I'd say 24 inches.
Okay.
There was 4 of them. We had 4 main engines, 25,000 horsepower steam turbines.
The Providence weighed how many tons?
Oh, I'd have to look that up for you. I know it was 200 and, no, it was longer than 2 football fields by 13 feet. So that's 200 and some yards, and it was about 60 feet across, 60 feet wide. It was built for speed.
Yeah. And what did the ship do?
Well, while we were in the States off of the coast, we did a lot of target practice. They had an island up not too far from probably Santa Catalina. It was called San Clemente Island that the Navy used for target practice. And we would actually go out, we went out one time to sink a scrap cargo ship, and there was us and a destroyer and a submarine. And we were supposed to sink this ship. And of course all of our gunner mates were new, and the ship was riding high in the water, so the first torpedoes the submarine fired at it went under it. I was down in the engine room when all this was happening, and the destroyer was the only one that was hitting it. Our gunner, I think we hit it a few times, but the ship finally started going down, and they came down and relieved me. I was a throttle watch, which set the RPM for the propeller. And they came down and relieved me and said, if you want to see a ship go down, you better get up topside. So by the time I got up there, there was probably 50 feet of the bow sticking out of the water, and that destroyer was just whacking at it, just hitting it. But it was fairly interesting. But we did a lot of target practice. We went to Hawaii a couple of times for just a little R&R, and we did what we call show the flag. We went up and down the West Coast. We went up to Portland, Oregon, went up the Columbia River to the Willamette River, and we tied up in downtown Portland, Oregon during the Portland Rose Festival. And we let the civilians come on board in groups, and I was assigned as a tour guide. So I had, the first day we were there, and so I had a group come on, and there happened to be a couple of girls in that group that I got fairly friendly with, and so the rest of the time there we had an automobile and dates. But then we left Portland and went to Seattle, and went up there for the Seattle Sea Fair, and that was another good time. I didn't have to be a tour guide there, but I got to go see the hydroplane races. I got to see Miss Budweiser race, and then we left there and went to Vancouver, Canada. And so we were doing a lot of show the flag. And then in November of '66, we got orders to go to Westpac over the Western Pacific.
Where are your general quarters in the ship?
Beg your pardon?
Your general quarters.
My general quarters was down in the engine room, and when I first started, I had general quarters in the lower level of the engine room, which had all the auxiliary equipment. The engines were steam turbines that was hooked up to a reduction gear, because the steam turbines turned at a lot of high RPM. And the steam that went through the turbines went into a condenser and condensed back into water. And then the water had to be recirculated back to the boilers, so the boilers could make more steam to run the engines. It was, yeah, my general quarters, and then I was moved from the lower level to a throttle watch. And we had, since we had two engines in the after engine room, we had a throttle watch on each one of them, and we had a big old valve that opened steam up to the main turbine, and we set the RPM. We had a huge tachometer right in front of us, and if the bridge called down, and we had you've seen them in the movies, and they have them on the bridge where they set the speed, and if they called down a certain speed, we knew what RPMs to set that on. And our full speed at that time was supposed to have been classified, but it's no longer classified. Our full speed was about 33 knots, which is a little over 35 miles per hour, which is, that's moving for a ship that size. And we're still not as fast as the carriers.
Yeah. What was your average day on the ship?
Average day on the ship, well, before I was promoted, my average day was, you had a 4-hour watch every day. Sometimes you had 2 4-hour watches, and I usually had a lower level watch, which I checked all the pumps and stuff and make sure that they all had oil, make sure they run all right. And if there needed to be cleanup, I did clean up. Sometimes we had a lot of oil lines. Oil was our main thing to keep those engines going. And we had them painted sometimes, and we'd get a different engineering officer, and he would come on board the ship, and he would come down to the engine room, and he would say, I want the paint chipped off of these oil lines, and I want those oil lines polished. They were copper nickel, and when you polished them, they were real pretty. But it was a pain in the rear. And we'd get another engineering officer, and he'd say, I want these oil lines painted. But it was, and then as I got, when I got promoted, I would stand upper level watch, which was over the 2 throttle watches. I also stood a lot of throttle watch up above too.
Now, did you have reveille on the ship?
Yeah, we had reveille at 6 o'clock every morning.
6 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah, we had a petty officer in the compartment that made sure you got out of your bunk. We had a first class, which was an E6. He was the hardest guy to get up, and the reveille petty officer would go grab the side of his bunk and shake it, and this guy would come up swinging every morning.
How far could the Providence go before you had to refuel?
I'm not really sure. We could go a long ways. When we left California to go to the Pacific, we went to Hawaii, and we were there a couple of days, and then we left and went to Yokosuka, Japan, and we never refueled all the way over there. And from Yokosuka, Japan, we went to Vietnam a lot. We cruised up and down the coast of Vietnam, firing inland night and day. And
what targets were you firing at?
the targets were called into us, I'm sure. We had spotter planes. I used to watch the little spotter planes during the day. Mm-hmm. They would come off out over the water, and we were not that far off of the shore. I mean, we could see people on the beach from where we were at.
Now, when you're firing, you're at general quarters when you're firing?
Yes.
Okay.
Not all the time, but sometimes we will. We were in general quarters. Usually when we were threatened, we actually got in a duel with a shore battery up off of the DMZ. In fact, they said they counted 600 splashes. Whatever they were shooting at us wasn't quite reaching us. And they said they counted 600 splashes out in the water that they shot at us, which seems like an awful lot to me. But,
what were you thinking when they were firing at you?
I was just doing my job.
What was your job at that time?
I was down in the engine room, machinist mate. I was the throttle watch.
Throttle watch.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, I mean, you could hear the ship was firing constantly. The big 6-inch guns and the 5-inch guns. We had, it wasn't so much in the engine room, but when the big guns go off, the concussion from the guns, you get the concussion through the air, which is a little bit slower than the concussion you get through the water. Mm-hmm. So in our compartments where we slept, since it was clear to the back of the ship, you could actually feel 2 concussions or hear or feel them. You go boom, boom, boom. You get one through the air and one through the water, and sometimes they'd fire all night long. And then usually the next day we'd pull out and pull up next to an ammo ship and take on ammo. Mm-hmm. We were moving empty brass back to an ammo ship, and usually when we would do that, we would also exchange movies, because we'd watch movies up in the mess deck, and something broke on one of those cables or lines when they were moving that brass and those movies across, and it all hit the water. I don't know how many 1,000 pounds of brass they lost in the water there. But yeah, I remember at night we'd be firing in the coast from one horizon to the other. It seemed like it was lit up with flares. And we used to pull into Da Nang Harbor, which is called Da Nang Bay on the map, but we called it Da Nang Harbor. We would pull in there and we'd get pretty close to land. And we would fire all night long. We couldn't have any lights on up topside. Of course, they could see our big guns, but they wanted to protect us from snipers. They didn't want no cigarettes topside, no lights on. We even stationed enemy swimmer sentries to watch for enemy swimmers, but and we did that for a couple of months. And well, I suppose we'd go wherever we got called for support, wherever we could reach. But by the time I left the ship to come back to the States, actually it was before that, we had fired over 20,000 rounds of 5 and 6 inch ammo. Used to be piles of brass laying on the deck.
Now, how did you, when you were moving this brass to the other ship, how do you get the line to the other ship to move the brass?
I'm not sure how they did it, since I was a lower level guy, an engine room guy. A lot of times I wasn't topside.
Okay.
I know how they moved lines to a pier. I mean, they used what they call the monkey fist on the end of a rope, and they would throw it over, and it was a small line,